third session on our training today. We have a great panel of state energy office representatives from Minnesota, Massachusetts, Virginia, and Rhode Island that will share a little bit about what's happening in their state in terms of distribution planning and how they are from the state energy office are engaged on a lot of these things that we've been discussing so far. And we will in the order on the screen. So we'll start with Ari and then go to Julia, Ashish, and William. And we will have some time at the end as usual for questions. So if you have any questions for your colleagues from the state energy offices, don't hesitate to put them in the chat, as well as raise your hand at the end if you want to ask your question live. So with that, Ari, if you want to start us off.
All right, thank you, Kristen. My name is Ari Zwick, and I'm with the Minnesota Department of Commerce. I'm a rates analyst, and I'm in regulatory, so we just work on all the utility filings, and I'm the lead analyst on our integrated distribution plans this round. And I'm just going to go through some background and then our role and then the issues we're having in the IDPs and talk about how we're strategizing on them. So just for an overview of the integrated distribution plans, they come every 2 years, and they're supposed to cover a 5-year plan with a budget of everything that's happening on the distribution system. And there are 3 investor-owned utilities that are required to file distribution plans and 1 rate-regulated co-op. And so our utilities are Xcel Energy, Minnesota Power, and Otter Tail on the investor-owned side, and then Dakota Electric is the rate-regulated co-op. And there's also a transportation electrification plan, which is separate from the distribution plans. They're filed at the same time, but it has a separate set of statutory requirements, whereas the distribution plans were created by the commission on its own authority. And so there's a bit of a statutory difference in where they're coming from, and I think how the commission views what they should be doing with these plans, because our commission created the distribution plans. I think they don't want to exercise as much force as they do when they have a statutory mandate, and that kind of feeds into some of the things I'll talk about later. And we're in the midst of our filings right now, and it's like a 6-month sprint where we have a few months to get in the filings and issue information requests and things like that. But the timeline is very tight, actually, and we're just kind of scrambling to make sure that we hit these deadlines that are coming like every 2 weeks in a few months. And the state energy office's role in the distribution plan is, so we have on the regulatory side, like we're handling the actual filings, but we are working with our program side as well. So there is some work being done with the Emerging Energy Technologies unit that's helping us with some of our analysis that we're always sprinting from thing to thing to thing. And so it's nice to have people that aren't doing that can spend some more time and think about things with more depth of analysis. So that's really nice that we're utilizing both halves of our office for the distribution plans. And so we serve as a ratepayer advocate, and also we're tasked with trying to make sure that the state's energy goals are achieved, as well as statutory compliance. So those are like the sort of 3 pillars that we're coming in to analyze distribution plans from. And so in the last, sometimes we're the only people to comment on the distribution plan, so our role is rather important in that regard. So Xcel is the big flagship utility. They get most of the attention. They make up most of the load in the state, but the other 4 utilities other 3 utilities that aren't Xcel, we were the only person or the only group to comment on the distribution plans for Minnesota Power, Otter Tail, and Dakota Electric. In initial comments, there were some people that commented on the transportation electrification plans, but those are, again, like a little bit separate, filed at the same time. And so we were, at least in the last round, the sole party to be commenting. And so that's the only pushback that utilities could get on their plans. And we're also very interested in coalition building, which we did some of last time around, where we noticed that there was a lack of any discussion on electrification, mostly like space and water heating and industrial process heating, things like that, and how that could particularly impact like one of our utilities is winter peaking. And so if you start adding more winter load to a winter peaking utility, that could be particularly problematic for certain areas. And so we wanted to make sure that they were including that in their distribution planning. And this time around, we're doing more robust stakeholder engagement. We've already met with a bunch of stakeholder groups, and our filings are very large and hard to analyze. And so a lot of groups will sit out. And we're trying to do some of the upfront work where they can then come in after we do our analysis and get behind some of our positions and do some coalition building, which helps a lot with trying to convince the commission to do new things. So that's the main things that we're doing in uh, our role for distribution planning. And we've been struggling with a couple of problems with the distribution planning process. So the biggest thing is that they're static plans. They're approved by the commission. They're not approving programs or anything. It's just like, here's the plan. You can request things to happen coming out of it, but it's not a prudency review, and there's no cost recovery associated with it. So it's mostly just analysis. And so the commission has been reluctant to ask utilities to do some of the work that we want them to do. And the effect of that is that it ends up going to a rate case. And in a rate case, our position is that it's too late to analyze some of the other options. Like a utility might be able to say like, oh, this option is better than this option, but they didn't look at maybe a third one that's a better option than that. Like their burden of proof is to say that they're doing a better job than what they're currently doing. And we're trying to elicit some of that information in our distribution plans and evaluate programs so that we can try and guide some of those funding decisions to more cost-effective pathways. And the most pressing need for us is that our biggest utility, Excel, their distribution budget has increased by a factor of 4 in the last 10 years. And that's very concerning to us. And if that trend continues, I mean, it seems to be leveling off, but it'll take up a very large share of their entire utility spending, and that's problematic. So we're trying to understand why their load is increasing, and we're trying to develop strategies for them to prove that what they're doing is the most cost-effective strategy, as I've already discussed. And so like those, and it might be very difficult for any utility to actually prove that they're optimizing anything, because like, resource plan, for example, you can optimize for large power plants, whereas the distribution system is thousands of assets, and you can't just go in and do an economic model and say, oh, do this option here or this option here, and multiply that by 1,000. Like it doesn't work, but we are trying to borrow some of those concepts when we're analyzing distribution plans. And so going into like how we're actually treating, I mean, the analysis of the plans, like the theme is for utilities to get more out of what they already have. And so all the things that I'm going to describe are one flavor of that or another. Like instead of replacing assets, if you can just reduce load at that peak time, or if you can extend the life of an asset, there's a bunch of different things, or even just doing more long range planning of like Excel is planning for a lot of load growth. And so if they're just replacing assets based on a 5 or 10-year load forecast, then they might have to replace it multiple times, and then you're paying for assets twice because we have a 50-year depreciation time frame. So like those are the general themes of what we're trying to do. The first big push that we've had is to get more data, and the big one that I'm interested in is line utilization. And so utilities plan for the peak, but they're not really thinking much. None of our utilities have data on what happens under the peak. And so on that peak day, which could trigger a capacity upgrade, how much space is there between your peak interval and what's coming before or after it? And so we're asking for that data, and this is apparently like a huge effort for utilities to supply to us. And so that's where, if we get it all, it would come in the next round of IDPs. And so this is going to be a recursive process of trying to get data to understand the problem and then direct solutions at like how much of your assets are you actually using. So that's our big one. And then also asset replacement. Like I'm trying to figure out in a budget, how much is the utility actually going to replace from X, Y, or Z program? And that's apparently like a really hard thing for them to tell me as well. Like they could have a list of 1,000 purchases that they made, and they can't say like, oh, well, here's the capacity rating of this or that. So all what the result is that we just get a bunch of spending requests, and we can't really say what it's going for, and then they're reluctant to give us information about what they think will happen because then they could get attacked in a rate case. So those are like the main issues that we're having. And kind of like our first line of how we're trying to address it. And the other things, and I'll stop in just a second, that we're looking at is like budget scenario planning. Like if you adjusted your budget, what would you get more or less, and what might the effects be? And then like very high resolution, looking at individual investments in a program evaluation context. So if you have like one number for a program, under the hood, there could be more cost-effective or less cost-effective programs, and I'll stop there. That's my time, but thank you.
Okay, thank you. I already have a bunch of questions, but I will hold my questions until we have all of our state panelists speak. So without further ado, we'll go to Julia next. And I'll pull up your slides, Julia. And Julia will talk a little bit about how in Massachusetts, the Massachusetts State Energy Office is involved in the Grid Modernization Advisory Council and some of the other associated parts of the planning process in Massachusetts. So give me just a second and I will share your slides. Okay, I'm gonna start the slideshow. All right, should be able to see it. Good. Now you should be able to see it.
See you now. Yep. Thank you.
Yeah, of course.
Well, hi everyone. Good afternoon. My name is Julia Fox, and I work for the Massachusetts Department of Energy Resources. And today I'll be speaking about our engagement with distribution system planning, specifically with the Electric Sector Modernization Plans, or ESMPs, and our Grid Modernization Advisory Council, or GMAC. You can go to the next slide. Great. So I'll provide a little introduction to our office and also a little bit of context setting for Massachusetts policies and regulations that inform our distribution system planning for today. And then I'll share some lessons learned, some challenges and successes, and then some other areas of distribution system planning that we work on. Next slide. So DOER, or the Department of Energy Resources, is our state energy office, and it's our mission to create a clean, affordable, resilient, and equitable energy future for everyone in our state. In our office, we have multiple divisions that do program management, offering grants, working with municipalities, and I support our policy planning and analysis division, and part of that work focuses on distribution system planning. Next slide. So a little bit of history, I can kind of breeze through this here, but just setting the stage, Massachusetts has restructured. So we have investor-owned utilities. We have 3 of them: Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil. And with this restructuring, there's a requirement for the utilities to provide annual reliability reports. And that's really our PUC's, or Department of Public Utilities, window into understanding each of their systems and their plans to keep the grid running and providing safe and reliable service to their customers. And in the next big phase of policy, we have the 2008 Global Warming Solution Act. And with this started the Energy Efficiency Advisory Council, which oversees our largest energy efficiency program, MassSave, and established a lot of great energy efficiency programs that really resulted in a notable period of reducing consumption. And we also had a boom of solar, so establishing some greenhouse gas emissions limits and some solar incentive programs. So during this time, load is relatively flat. But then with this boom of solar and other distributed generation, we start to have some grid capacity constraints. So with long interconnection queues, our PUC opens up some proceedings to try to fix this queue crisis. And there's some new programs that come out of that, but we're still kind of in the same boat of trying to figure out how do we expand capacity and proactively plan for more DG growth. And part of that leads into what we're going to talk about today, the ESMPs. So the 2020 2022 climate law is somewhat inspired by this DG interconnection issue, but now it's really thinking about how do we also think about new load coming onto the system. So this law established the ESMP, or Electric Sector Modernization Plan requirement, and our GMAC, a stakeholder advisory group that's reviewing these plans. And also there's an EV coordinating council as well that's working on transportation electrification. Next slide. We're also informing our grid planning by our Clean Energy and Climate Plan. So Massachusetts is working on long-term goals for reducing our greenhouse gas emissions and having net zero emissions. But really the common thread here is that electrification is the backbone of our decarbonization strategy. And so that makes distribution system planning or grid planning really essential for realizing our goals in the building and transportation sectors. Next slide. That leads to the main event, and that's the ESMPs. And these are strategic plans that are created by our utilities. So Eversource, National Grid, and Unitil submit these plans to our Department of Public Utilities, and they're a 5-year plan. So the term is 5 years. And these plans are required by statute, and the requirements are really to create plans to upgrade the grid and specify investments to achieve the goals of improving resiliency, reliability, promoting DER, interconnection and growth, prepare for climate change, accommodate electrification, and also minimize impacts on ratepayers, so keeping investments cost effective. So these include 5 to 10 year forecasts and also a demand assessment through 2050. And these are reviewed by the Grid Modernization Advisory Council. So the next slide, we'll get into that. And this is a group that is made up of a diverse array of interests and organizations that's also outlined in law. And it's really, they're represented by policymakers, low-income consumers, environmental advocates, developers, the utilities. And this group is charged with reviewing the draft plans before they're formally adjudicated by our PUC. And DOER is the chair of this organization. And we are also supported by an external consultant. And the law also authorizes the GMAC to have a budget to support consulting and operating expenses. Next slide, please. This slide isn't really here to overwhelm you, but just provide a visual on the many parties involved with our development of the ESMPs. Just not development, but also stakeholder engagement, the execution of the ESMPs, and each one of these roles have direct impact on shaping the future grid that serves everyone. Next slide. So the process. 2022, we have the climate law, the GMAC and ESMPs are established. So DOER is really working to figure out how do we make this GMAC thing work. And we go into 2023 and we start hosting monthly meetings. So convening all the stakeholders identified in law to figure out, what's the baseline understanding of the grid, what expertise does every stakeholder in this group bring, and start preparing for reviewing draft plans. So in September, the utilities send us those plans, and we're talking about like 500 to 7-page documents for each of these utilities. So very comprehensive, dense documents that contain their plans for the next 5 years of updating the grid to meet our climate goals. The GMAC has a very tight review, and it's about 80 days to review each of these plans and provide recommendations before it goes to the DPU. So GMAC produces a report with 88 recommendations to improve these plans to meet the statutory requirements. And the EDCs, the utilities, take this feedback and they have to respond to it. They don't have to accept it, but they have to respond to it and then file this with the PUC. It's adjudicated, DOER intervenes, other interveners also are involved in this process, and they are approved. So the DPU approved these plans in 2024 as strategic plans. So this means that investments were not given specific cost recovery. That was done in a second phase of the proceeding. So ES&P Phase 2 was talking about short-term cost recovery for each of these investments. So that had to go through another adjudicated period. And I'll talk about in another slide what was actually approved, but it wasn't all of it. So the ES&Ps were more of a strategic planning document, not a cost recovery document. So the GMAC continues to meet, and this gets even more messy and more exciting because we learn as we go and we figure out, all right, what do we do now that we have these plans and we have 5 years until the next plans are submitted? So the GMAC has priorities of just learning more about distribution system planning, collaborating with the utilities, and setting out objectives to better equip ourselves to give recommendations to improve these plans. Thinking about forecasting impacts, cost challenges, implementation barriers, and making sure that we're increasing transparency to stakeholders about what's going on with the grid. So the next plan will be submitted in 2029. Next slide. So basically here with what was actually approved of these first plans, only less than half of the investments that were put forward were approved. Mainly what the DPU did not approve are capital investments related to substations. So National Grid, many of their investments were not approved for short-term cost recovery with a reconciling charge. And the DPU's position was that grid modernization should become part of the utility standard business practice. So thinking more about putting this into base rates. What was approved was a lot of technology and software platforms. There was EV highway charging substation projects that were approved, integrated energy planning work, and community engagement work. Next slide, please. So what we learned is that the review timeline was very challenging to go through this as a GMAC. I think with that recommendation we gave to the utilities, and which the department also saw, they extended the review timeline to allow for better engagement and collaboration before it going to an adjudicated proceeding. There was also recommended areas to collaborate on, and that included forecasting methodologies, investigating least cost investments and alternatives to investments like non-wires alternatives, thinking about sensitivity analyses for the demand assessment, and thinking about how the investment reprioritization process works with each utility. So the GMAC took these recommendations into our strategic planning, and we spent 2025 engaging in productive dialogue, learning about grid modernization elements, and producing fact sheets that are usable and readable for everyday consumers. And then in 2026, we've gone through a strategic planning effort to actually start to dig into these plans more fully and figure out how we can set ourselves up for 2029 when we get the next review. Next slide, please. This is the last thing I'll share here. These are just some other elements of distribution system planning that we're involved in, some of which are directly correlated to the ES&P, such as some work with climate vulnerability and resilience plans, some grid modernization efforts of smart meters now being installed, climate compliance plans, which is related to the future of gas and transitioning off of gas, and lots of other work, which has been a great effort by our office in working with different stakeholders. But the ES&Ps have really paved the way for us getting more insight into how the utilities plan their system and figure out ways that we can get more stakeholders involved to make a better plan to reach our climate goals ultimately. Learn more about the GMAC, check out our brand new website just launched this month. Lots of great information for consumers and some more information about the ES&Ps and the GMAC's work. That's it. Thanks, everyone.
Great. Thank you so much, Julia. And we will go from the Northeast. We were Midwest, Northeast, and now we'll go to Virginia, where they're thinking very much about what to do on load forecasting. So I'll turn it over to Ashish to tell us a little bit about how they're engaging on that issue and other distribution planning aspects.
Thank you, Kristen. My name is Ashish. I lead the energy modeling team here at Virginia Department of Energy, State Energy Office. And today I'll be, talking in a high level of what the modeling and forecasting capabilities we're trying to build in our office. And we have like a dedicated energy modeling team at the State Energy Office and started last year. And the main purpose for this team was to help in energy plan that comes every 4 years. So the next one is due next year as the new governor comes in. So that was the main purpose for our energy modeling team that started. But now, over this last 1 year, we have developed a pretty good foundation or fundamentals to run the modeling capabilities. Today, I'll not be talking exclusively on distribution planning. We are working on that, but now currently we are developing capabilities for more system-wide planning and have not into very granular level in distribution. But some of the things that we have done is we have worked on a load forecasting. So we have, in the last 3 to 4 months, we purchased almost around $300,000 of softwares, data to help us enhance our modeling capabilities. The one that we procure is on the load forecasting. So we are working on long-term load forecasting for the state. And there's multiple tools out there. We went with industry standard tool with Itron, Metrics ND, Metrics LD, and we are also working on our in-house modeling capabilities in Python and Julia. So the reason why we were interested in doing load forecasting, particularly in the long term, was our policy, our energy plan was very heavily dependent on the forecasting that comes from these utilities like Dominion or comes from the PZAM. Their forecasting are for their areas and not comprehensively or holistically for the state. So one of the things that we were interested is to see how the load forecasting for the state looks like. We have electric co-ops, we have other utilities like APCO, so we want to have a better picture. And that was one of the reasons we had, and we are working on, we're working with the utilities as well, and we're working with electric co-op as well, and for now try to consolidate what forecasting they have and put it together. But eventually in future we'd like to develop our own forecasting for the state, and is planned to produce like every year statewide forecasting, long-term forecasting of load or particularly EV or data centers. So that's in the long-term plan we have, and we have tools and resources for that. That's the first part in terms of planning capabilities. The second part we focused heavily is in the capacity expansion. So we procured industry standard tool again, Plexus for that, and we're working on creating a Virginia specific capacity expansion modeling, which basically looks up to 20 years ahead. What kind of generation needs to be built, when is to be built, what is the least cost resources, and we are considering how different policies might impact this least cost choices, like the Virginia Clean Energy Act or the EPA or the REGI. So we are evaluating these scenarios, and a lot of the analysis that comes from the load forecasting tool goes to this capacity expansion tools, which will help us evaluate the least cost resources and help in energy plan. What resources should be prioritized based on what is the objective, whether it is affordability we're talking, whether it's reliability. And then we have another sort of tool which is on the policy simulator like Vensim. So basically we have all these resources that we have procured over this last 1 year, and we are working on enhancing our capabilities to do our forecasting in-house in the state government, in the state agency. A lot of our work in modeling and forecasting in the past was done through consultant and national lab, and which were great, but we wanted to build in-house capabilities. One of the reasons is, in terms of when you're going with consultant, we're doing a lot of cost saving here, so we can do a lot of scenarios and a lot of analysis. And then there is a time in the General Assembly where now there is an increasingly number of bills that are related to energy, and it has been very helpful for us to evaluate some of these upcoming bills on what's going to be the impact of this bills on the energy resources, resource adequacies, things like that. And now, talking more into distributed planning, we have not been there yet, looking in that granularity. We have some data coming from DMB, especially on the EV side, and we have a partnership with the JMU University, Virginia Clean Cities. So they are doing a lot of forecasting at the distribution level as well for the transportation side. So we have some understanding of what's happening at the distribution level, but mostly on the DER side, we have yet to look into in more detail. Dominion has a pretty good resources on the hosting capacity and all, but as an agency, we have not really looked into detail about that. But eventually, there is a plan that whatever analysis or whatever results we get from the system-wide long-term capacity or long-term forecasting results, we can integrate it with the distribution planning well, and then have a better understanding of how the overall system works, and not just the capacity addition in terms of generation. Um, so yeah, so these are some of the tools and some of the effort that we have worked, and we are putting investment or putting money or hiring more people to help us, run these tools and expand our capabilities. We are working very closely with the National Lab, with the technical assistance support as well. So it has been very productive, and would love to share any lessons that we have learned over building this modeling team, and related to the softwares, related to the data sets, and related to the what problem these tools can solve. Now talking a little bit about some of the challenges that we are now dealing with, and how to best integrate it. First one is how do we best coordinate with the stakeholders like utilities, co-op, and municipal utilities, and other large load. As a state energy office in Virginia, we're not a regulatory body, so utilities or any other stakeholders are not compliant to give any data or anything of that sort. So it's more on their voluntary sharing of the information. So it's sometimes challenging for all the stakeholders, to have all the data that we need from them. So that's one of the challenging piece while we are working in this modeling. And other is how do we integrate this system-wide capacity expansion or modeling with other, like a distribution planning or transmission planning. How do we make sure that we integrate? And I looked into the agenda there. After this session, there's a session related to that, so looking forward to that. But yeah, it's been a great year for energy modeling team and Virginia State Energy Office, that we have for our own modeling capabilities developed, and we are looking forward for next year's and more for how do we use this tools and resources that we have developed and procured so far. Thank you.
Great. Thank you so much, Ashish. And it's really great and really exciting what you all are doing in Virginia on the load forecasting and modeling. So last but not least, we'll go back up the East Coast to Rhode Island. I'll invite William to unmute and get on camera to talk a little bit about kind of their engagement on the municipal side with the municipal utilities in Rhode Island, and a project that I think has just concluded or is about to conclude. But correct me if I'm wrong, William, and looking forward to your remarks.
Yeah, thanks, Kirsten. Good afternoon, everyone. So I've been with Rhode Island Office of Energy Resources for about 3 years. We're obviously the state energy office. Rhode Island is unique in that we really have one main utility, Rhode Island Energy, which is the electric serving entity for roughly 99% of the state, and then we have 2 small municipal co-ops. So there's some unique characteristics to the work that OER does, and the sort of regulated environment there. But one of the one of the areas that was explored, and one of our former colleagues in the office, Carrie Gill, participated in a narrow task force around better engagement around land use planning with municipalities and utilities. And the integrated grid planning project was really an extension out of that. Basically taking that and saying, well, let's actually go and do that. Let's actually find a community, who is, currently engaged in discussion and review and examination of their land use, their zoning, some different municipal planning aspects, and let's bring in the utility and let's start having some discussions, and let's sort of crack open some of these concepts and see what we can maybe shake out of them. So the office was able to find a ready partner in Johnson, Rhode Island. The town planner there, at the time, was a part-time town planner. That becomes relevant in a minute. But they were working on their comprehensive plan. All the municipalities in Rhode Island, every 10 years, have to refresh a comprehensive plan that looks at their growth, their open space use, their land use, come up with priorities that align with their statewide planning, with energy, the state energy plan, a host of aspects, address the major issues and priorities. So if they're, obviously, we have, I think, 400 miles of coastline, despite being, such a tiny state. So coastal resilience is a big component for a lot of those communities. And but look at all the different ways and come with priorities and go through a process, have that go before their town planning council and their town councils, and then get submitted for approval to the Division of Statewide Planning. When they get submitted to statewide planning, agencies like OER, DEM, all the other state agencies look at those comprehensive plans and offer suggestions, offer ways to tweak them. So, Johnson going through that process, doing that work, seemed like a great opportunity to, start investigating some of this. As we went through, I joined the office midway through that project, and carrying through the Johnston project. We quickly saw a couple of things. One, we did some really interesting modeling. The utility modeled out load and capacity forecasts through 2050 on all the feeders in Johnson, Rhode Island. Looked at where areas of growth were going to put constraint and a capacity constraint on the system, and then think about what are some of the implications of that? What are some of the implications for adding new distributed generation, for adding new electric vehicle charging? Tried to work through all of those different considerations. What ended up happening then about 2 years ago, as we were trying to organize another public workshop focused on the business community and what they thought some planning priorities related to these forecasts might be, is Johnson one experienced a significant infrastructure issue with their sewer system and their wastewater system, and then they experienced some catastrophic flooding that resulted in a neighborhood having to be seized by the town, seized through eminent domain and restricted. So, one of the two quick takeaways from that were, one, it's difficult to do these processes when you only have one point of contact. This is all being really handled by the town planner. The town planner was suddenly inundated with a lot of extra work that limited their ability to focus on other things, as they had much more incipient efforts to focus on. But then also too, sort of behind that was they were already a couple years into their comprehensive planning process by the time we were getting around to reviewing it. And that was true across the municipalities. So what we've been working to do in IGP 2.0, which we've worked on over the course of, starting late last fall. We had submitted and been approved for one of the Department of Energy technical assistance deep dives. LBNL found our proposal worthwhile, paired us back up with regulatory assistance project. Rich Sedano, who some of you may know, and Luisa Birrell, and allowed us to, sort of start up iterating on another version of this to make this a programmatic effort. So we reached out, we worked to reconnect with Johnston, but then also connected with two other communities, Cranston, which is just outside of Providence, and Westerly, which is coastal, summer season community down in the southwest of the state. Cranston was interesting. They have a lot of aggressive development housing targets, but also they're in a pretty built out area as it is. They do have some additional space on their western edge, but really where they were focusing on development was redevelopment in an already somewhat dense area. So what the capacity and build out potential was there was really of interest to them, and then trying to find a way to utilize and incorporate some other considerations, for instance, deploying more EV charging throughout the community, and understanding the sort of residents who might be attracted by having access to more of that, and how to incorporate those with their other development priorities. Westerly was interesting. Westerly had a couple existing distributed generation facilities that they were navigating some confusion and let's say an overburdening of billing and administration issues with. But then they're also having a voltage. They had an area of their downtown section that was having intermittent voltage issues during the summertime. When their population peaked, when there was a lot of excess, a much higher load than the rest of the year. Done at that time, but they were having trouble pinpointing that, and it was really unclear, who they had been working with utility to address that. So we had a couple different areas that we wanted to focus in on that. Excuse me, just for a second. I have two little kids, and we're on, head cold number 3 for the season, for the school year. We spent the year Westerly, unfortunately, after a few months of engagement, sort of went quiet. Unclear if they got busy, if it was a decision was made somewhere that they didn't want to keep engaging with the state office for one reason or another. But Cranston, we worked with continuously throughout the year, looking at a few different issues, looking at how they were approaching revision of their comprehensive plan. This culminated at the end of September with a forum that we hosted, where Cranston, Johnston, another community, North Kingston, and then as well as our Executive Office of Housing, the utility, and Division of Statewide Planning was going to attend, but unfortunately the their person was under the weather that day. But we had a day-long workshop to discuss a few of these issues, and also really just trying to understand what the municipalities are working with, talk in a very candid way about the comprehensive planning process, and again, continue to try and shape this project, so that we are, one, always continuing to focus on what the municipalities, what the town planners can need, what we can provide, how we can provide it to them in a way that is not, constraining them, and they're, like most of us, they are time constrained, they're capacity constrained. It was really great effort having RAP on board for that, help us develop a survey, a sort of municipal energy self-assessment tool. We have some EV charging deployment materials that they helped us develop, and currently working to establish another cohort for 2026. And again, keep this rolling year by year. I'll also be adding an energy fellow that we've been allocated for 2026 to our project team, which will help out with some of the facilitation and work that we do. So leave it there for the description, and if anyone has any questions.
Great. That sounds great. Thank you so much. And really impressive, all of you, how differently you all approach the same kind of challenge or some of the same challenges and from different sides. So really like the different flavors.